All right. Good noon, everybody, and welcome back to God Was Here, our study of the life of Christ as recorded in the books of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. I don't think I mentioned last week that I was going to take a quick break, so I apologize about that, but I'm sure you figured it out by now if you follow live. Um, we have been studying the Sermon on the Mount. And as I've said before, I think the main theme of the Sermon on the Mount really is contradiction. Jesus continually contradicts certain ideas. At points, he contradicts teachings of those around him at the time that are against the gospel at times. He even says things that, on the face of them, appear to contradict Old Testament teaching. Although, as I point out, I don't think that's actually the case. I think it's actually this beautiful harmony that goes together. Of course, you can go back and see what I'm talking about if you'd like, or if you'd like to jump in into the middle of the sermon with us here, that is fine too. Last time we had gotten into the sixth chapter of Matthew, and we went through verses 1 through 18, I believe. All of those, once again, have to do with contradiction. The contradiction is between the practices of the people considered righteous at the time and what God would have us to do. Basically, it's all about making sure that you're not doing things just to be seen. As we mentioned, there's a little bit of nuance here. Some people would go so far as to say this means then that nobody can ever happen to see you doing something righteous, and you certainly can't ever allow yourself to be seen doing something righteous. That's not what the Bible is teaching. In fact, that would contradict what Jesus said in the previous chapter when he said, "Let your light so shine." But it's about your heart. It's about your motivation. You shouldn't be doing good things just to be seen. And he gives some extreme examples. Those are there if you're really not sure of yourself. Man, am I doing this just to be seen? I'm not sure. Well, in that case, don't let anybody see you. Then you know you're not doing it to be seen. That's what Jesus is saying there. We're going to finish up Matthew chapter 6. Again, Matthew has the most thorough account of the Sermon on the Mount, so we'll be mostly camping out in that book for the rest of the sermon. And we still have a little bit more to go. We have the rest of chapter 6 and the entirety of chapter 7, all of that deal with the Sermon on the Mount. So, without further ado, we're going to read verses 19 through 24 to begin with. Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The eye is the lamp of the body, so if your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light is in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. I typically don't try to spend too much time picking on apostasies, at least in this lesson. I got a whole series of me picking on the apostasies. You can go back and see that as well on my YouTube. Not in this one, I try not to pick too much on them, but there is one in particular that kind of bothers me a lot. A question I often have when you are dealing with somebody who is teaching falsely is this somebody who is teaching falsely because they desire to deceive, or is it somebody who is teaching falsely because they themselves have been deceived? Now, neither is okay, and just because you've been deceived, it's not actually acceptable. You have to make sure you're teaching correctly. But I must say, I find myself sympathizing with the person who has been more deceived themselves and thinks they are being honest more than the deceiver. And I think it is good for a Christian to have a gracious attitude. So typically, I tend to err on the side of this is somebody who's been deceived, not necessarily a deceiver. But at the same time, that doesn't mean you're stupid. I like to use the United States, for myself, I like to try to use the United States standard of proof in criminal trials. You know that one, right? Innocent until proven guilty, and proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, at this point, I'm just speaking from my own wisdom. Feel free to take it or leave it. This isn't Bible. The Bible doesn't tell us exactly how to do it, but it gives us a few principles. But I think that's a pretty good way to go about it. Why reasonable doubt? Well, you can come up with an unreasonable doubt for just about anything. So you got to use your brain a little bit. A reasonable doubt. So for most false teachers, I try to give them the benefit of a doubt, and well, it's reasonable that this person has been deceived and is not themselves a deceiver. That, however, is not always true with some of the false teachers. There's some of them where it is just so blatantly obvious to me this is somebody who desires to deceive people. And one of those movements you see is the gospel of health and wealth. Those are those mega church pastors you see on TV. Now, there are some preachers on TV who are not like that. Right, Brother Phil Sanders, he's on TV, and he is not after your money. He's preaching the truth. But for the most part, that's not what you're going to see from those mega church pastors. Usually what they're looking for is money. They are preaching a gospel known as the gospel of health and wealth. It goes something like this. God desires to bless his children. Therefore, if you just take this little leap of faith and send us, a check for $1,000, well, God's going to bless you 100-fold. You send in $1,000. God later on in your life gives you $100,000. And here's some testimonies from some people we found who will tell you exactly that. Those are false teachers, and I don't buy for a moment that they are themselves deceived. I think they are deceivers, and so I have very little patience for that type of false teaching. Again, I don't have much patience for any false teaching, but especially that type of false teaching. I think what you have there is somebody who's trying to take your money from them. They are targeting people who are particularly vulnerable and who usually don't have much money to spend. If you know your New Testament, you know that God never once in the New Testament requires any certain amount of money. We're supposed to give a free will offering to God, but it doesn't say how much that is. Any denomination that says you must give 10%, they aren't teaching from the Bible. It says that in the Old Testament, but the Old Testament was a rule for the Jews and for a limited amount of time while the kingdom of Israel still was in place. It was a physical kingdom and needed to have taxes. Pretty reasonable tax rate, honestly, if you ask me. I would love to have just a 10% tax rate. And then on top of that, you had a free will offering that people were allowed to give. That is the type of offering we still have. Free will. Anybody who tells you have to give this much, it's cause for suspicion. And especially those who are saying God's going to give you back 100-fold. Now that's just completely contradictory to to the Bible. Jesus said, do not lay up your treasures in heaven. A real preacher, and I'm not saying every preacher who says this is legitimate when it comes to the Bible, but a legitimate preacher is going to say this. You know, most Christians in the New Testament, they weren't all that rich. In fact, I can't think of somebody in the New Testament at all who became rich as a result of being a Christian. We can see a couple of rich people who are Christians, who are disciples of Christ, but as far as we can tell, they only lost money on it. They never really gained much. Not physically, anyway. I'm also not saying that Christianity is necessarily a vow of poverty. But I am saying this, if you're getting rich off Christianity, you're doing something wrong. Horribly wrong. And those preachers, by the way, they're getting rich off Christianity. There's something wrong with that. Jesus says this. You're not making your investments into religion. You know, in the Old Testament system, one of the things, of course, he's doing is contradicting Old Testament with New Testament, contrasting, I should say, the two of them. You know, in the Old Testament system, there were certain physical promises of prosperity given to those people. Right? Look back into what they were shouting at each other from the tops of Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal. Those were two natural mountains that they formed a natural amphitheater. And from Mount Ebal, you're supposed to shout all these curses of the law when they first entered into the land, and from Gerizim they're supposed to shout all the blessings. And when you look at what those blessings are, they are physical prosperity. You are going to have a lot of land, you're going to have a lot of livestock, you're going to have a lot of children. We don't necessarily associate that with wealth today, but that was highly associated with wealth back then. You're going to have everything you want if you just follow God. And there are times you see that. And there are times we see where they're not following God and they physically are cursed for it. They don't prosper because of what they've done. But look at the Old Testament way of doing things. Look at that physical nation. And see if the physical wealth that God bestowed upon them when they were doing what they were supposed to do, did it actually help them in the long run, or did it just set them up to be cursed again? Because that wealth that they had been righteous for and fasted for and prayed to God for, why, that wealth made them fat and lazy. And it made them forget God. Jesus offers something better. Jesus says, don't search after treasures on this earth. Lay up for yourselves, invest in treasures in heaven. Let's look again. Therefore, do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroys and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust destroys and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Jesus said that the treasures we have right now, they're temporary. They're not going to do you any good. A lot of people, by the way, think they need finances for security's sake. They scoff at the idea that money doesn't bring happiness and say, well, at least I'd have some security. I know where my next meal was coming from. But that's part of the trap. There's a lot of people who lust after money, and they're not trying to get some giant mansion with a 3-tier swimming pool, infinity pool, or whatever. I'm just imagining wealth off the top of my head. Whatever. A lot of times it's just security. But money doesn't actually bring security. Let's put it into a modern context. Maybe you're not worried about the moth destroying all your expensive clothes or rust destroying the metal money that you got. All right? What if the nation goes into depression? What if the FDIC fails and suddenly your bank can't give you your money back? It's happened before. I don't think the FDIC necessarily, but Great Depression, suddenly the bank can't give you your money back. Sounds far-fetched, but it's happened. What about your investments? What if they all fail? It can happen. The truth is, there's no place you can place your money in which you will be perfectly secure and that you will have nothing to worry about. And there's no amount of money that you can get that will secure you from anything. Somebody says to himself, I'm worried that I might get cancer, so I need to have so much money in the bank. Well, maybe having enough money will help you in that situation. Who's the richest man on earth right now? Is that Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos or Bill Gates? I'm losing track of who. Pick one of them. Does any one of them have enough money to save them from a sudden brain aneurysm? How about getting hit by a car? Or a sudden major heart attack? The money might secure you from some things, but money will not bring you security, and your money is not secure. There have been people who have been fabulously wealthy who the next day become destitute and poor. I'm not saying you should have no concern over money whatsoever. That's not what Jesus is saying. The Bible is very consistent. We ought to work to help ourselves. But if you place your trust in that money will fail you. Place your trust above. Do not focus on the temporal things. James says this, what is your life? It is but a vapor that is here for a moment and then vanishes away. When you invest in your heavenly home, you're investing in an eternity of joy and happiness, which nothing could ever possibly take away. No moth will destroy it, no rust will destroy it, no fires, no depressions, no stock market crashes. And it will be there forever. There is security in heaven. There is no security on this earth. So focus your investments into the heavenly things. He then says, verse 22, the eye is the lamp of the body, so if your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light, but if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light is in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. Famously, the King James reads there, you cannot serve God and mammon. That's what mammon means. It's riches, it's money. How many of us are focused only on the money? Think about your job. How many hours do you spend a week working? 40? That's good. You ought to be, providing for your family if that's what you do. How much time do you spend investing in your heavenly home? Now, please don't misunderstand me. The New Testament does not give a minimum prescription for how much you have to give, how much time you have to spend investing in your heavenly home, but I suggest you do it because that's so much better. You cannot serve two masters. And maybe you're not saving up your money and thinking, well, all of this is for that giant mansion. I got a cartoon brain, so that's what I think of when I think of riches. I think basically the Beverly Hillbillies. That's what I think of when I think of riches. Whatever your idea is. And I'm not saying you can't have something nice every once in a while. But don't put your focus there. Don't think, oh, as soon as I get that big house or whatever it is I want, then I'll find my happiness. You will find no happiness there. You will find no security there. Invest it in heaven. It is so easy to focus on the earthly things because they're right there in front of us. I know I will enjoy this, but I have to trust in God and say that the real happiness that is more than the temporary pleasures we place upon ourselves, that is in heaven. So invest in that. How do I invest in that? Well, for one, be generous with the money you got. If God has blessed you with prosperity, give some of that back. Maybe give a lot of that back. Give it to somebody who needs it. Give it to a good charity. Give it to the church. Give it to somebody who is in need. Don't just spend it all on yourself. Don't just spend it all on your family. Is it a bad thing to give money to your family? Absolutely not. I've had family members who have been extremely generous with me, and I'm grateful for them. But don't just give it to your family either. Give it to whom God wishes it to be given to. Start thinking like that. Don't treat your money as my money. It's God's money. All right. Let's move over to the next section, which is similar. One more thing I wanted to mention. Jesus said in Matthew chapter 16, what does it profit a man if he gain the whole world, but loseth his soul? Too many people, and I can tell you, I've spoken to so many people who have been physically blessed by God. There's something about the money that makes people forget their spiritual needs. Don't let yourself be one of them. All right. Verse 25. Therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat or what you will drink, nor about your body, what you will put on. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothing? Look at the birds of the air. They neither sow nor reap nor gather into barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not of more value than they? And which of you, by being anxious, can add a single hour to his span of life? And why are you anxious about clothing? Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow, they neither toil nor spin. Yet I tell you, even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. But if God so clothes the grass of the field, which today is alive and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, will he not much more clothe you, O you of little faith? Therefore do not be anxious, saying, what shall we eat, or what shall we drink, or what shall we wear? For the Gentiles seek after all these things, and your heavenly Father knows that you need them all. But seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. Therefore do not be anxious about tomorrow, for tomorrow will be anxious for itself. Sufficient for the day is its own trouble. He then starts talking about being anxious. This is why I specifically mentioned the security that money brings, and that's the thing that ties these two thoughts together. Anxiety is something that plagues us as a society. I'd like to take a moment to say very clearly, I'm not trying to give a prescription for the mental condition of anxiety. I understand full well that these things can be very complex. I don't think Jesus is trying to say, just don't be anxious. I understand it's harder than that. But he does give us a philosophy, again, not some sort of psychological advice, but he gives us the philosophy, which is this: don't be anxious about what you're going to have. Don't be anxious about what you're going to eat tomorrow. Don't worry about whether or not you're going to be clothed tomorrow. Again, he doesn't tell us how to do that. He just says don't do that. So it's something we need to strive for. Again, the Sermon on the Mount often gives things that are very easy to understand, very difficult to implement, and I would say these are one of those things. But generally, don't be anxious about things. Don't worry about what you're going to have tomorrow. Sufficient for the day is the day's troubles. He says this: you got a lot to worry about right now, but the birds of the field, he makes sure that they have something to eat. He makes sure that the lilies of the field, they have clothing. Means this: generally speaking, by the way, he has given a general truth. This is not a guarantee to Christians that you're always going to have something to eat, that you're always going to have something to wear, that you're always going to be housed. But generally speaking, God knows what you need, and he's going to make sure you have it. Now, that's the general truth. Here is the actual 100% truth all the time. God is always going to give you what you need. But here's something that's a little bit difficult to swallow. You don't need food. You don't need clothes. You don't need shelter. There have been Christians that have starved to death. There have been Christians that have died of exposure, naked and cold and hungry. Because the truth is, you don't need anything in this physical world. Easy to understand, hard to apply. I know. You see how those two concepts merge together so perfectly? If you lay up your treasures in heaven, you're going to a place where you'll never have to worry about what you will eat, or what you will drink, or what you will wear, or where you will stay. You're going to a place where all of that is taken care of. Now, I mentioned that Jesus is telling a general truth here, which is true. I've said that there have been Christians that have starved to death, etc., but not many. And I think generally God understands what we need, and he provides for us. The general point that Jesus is trying to get across within these sections is to learn to focus our dependence on God. Don't place your hope on anything else. Place your hope on God. All right. That'll wrap up Matthew chapter 6 for us. Next week we will start getting into chapter 7 and begin to wrap up the Sermon on the Mount. Until then, I love you all, and I hope to see you next week.